Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video view series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, we'll be reviewing the Rules Supplement Save or Suck, designed by Kahn, Spencer Hibnick, and Trekiros for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. So, D&D 5e does have a little bit of spellcasting is very powerful in D&D. That being said, there are spells that you only have a saving throw involved and they don't deal any damage, and if the target makes the save, they do nothing. This is what is colloquially referred to as save or suck. A lot of spells like that, Fairy Fire or Slow are very popular debuffs. For example, Polymorph, where essentially you cast a spell, the target gets a saving throw. If they succeed in that save, they negate the effects of the spell. From the player point of view, this is a bummer because you're using your turn. You're often casting a spell that's, probably of one of the higher levels you can cast. You're hoping to get that spell off. Sometimes it's an AoE, so it's not as bad because you're at least getting some of the targets involved, but sometimes it's just a single target effect. And if the target makes the save, like a Cause Fear spell or something, then literally nothing happens. And that does feel bad, and that's what Save or Suck means. So this book is an attempt to modify those spells by introducing a close save system so that if somebody makes a save but doesn't make it by enough, then they suffer a kind of middling halfway effect. I'm trying to remember if there's another system, I don't know if it was Pathfinder or just video game that I played, because I reference Pose of Eternity a lot for interesting design choices, but I have seen other games that do that kind of thing where it's like you're trying to cast some debuff on an enemy, they make the save, so instead of this big debuff, it's like a smaller debuff that's on the enemy. For example, like you're trying to paralyze an enemy, they make the save, so they're slowed instead of paralyzed, kind of a thing. This does not go that far, I don't think, from what I can tell, but it does try to mimic a similar system to that. The rules are very easy to understand, very intuitive. I think they work pretty well, and they're actually inspired by existing rules from 5e, and so academically, the designers actually cite, for example, the Drow's hand crossbow action, which as part of the attack, they must succeed on a DC 13 con save or be poisoned for an hour, and if they fail to save by 5 or more, they are also unconscious while poisoned. There are a couple of abilities like that, by the way, where it's like, hey, if you fail by 5 or more, this other worse effect happens. And it's interesting to look at that from the point of view of like a saving throw for a spell. I can't name any off the top of my head on other abilities. I'm glad they cited at least one. But they took that rule concept and ran with it for saving throws for spells. So for example, now in order to make the full effects to negate a save spell, you have to actually succeed on the DC by 5 or more to fully negate that spell effects. If you only make the save by less than 5, then it's called a close save, and then you suffer the new effects, which are listed in here with all the different spells. If you, of course, fail the save altogether, you don't hit that DC number, then you still suffer the effects of the spell like normal. So the examples being if it's a DC 10 spell, which would be pretty low, then if it's a 9 or lower, then you fail and you suffer the full effects of the spell. If you get between a 10 and a 14, normally that's a pass, right? Nothing happens. Well, in this case, something does happen and you suffer the close save effect, which is a new effect that is explained in all the spells. If you do it by 5 or more, so a 15 or greater, then you negate the spell completely and, typically nothing happens. So for the example they used, if it's a DC 13 animal friendship spell and the target gets a 15, that is less than 5 over. They would have to make a DC 18 to fully actually make the save. So, but because they made it between that 0 to 4 over range, then they suffer the close save effects. And if they had gotten a 12 or lower, then they would fail completely and still be under the full effects. So Do we understand? Because I actually understood. I'm not the best person when it comes to understanding extra rules and stuff, but this one made sense to me. I was like, okay, and you used precedent from other actions. Again, there are other ones. Maybe in the comments you all can remind me of other effects where it's like, hey, if you fail by 5 or more, then this happens. And I've used that before in my rules, where if I'm looking at a save with maybe some kind of sliding scale of penalties or successes, and I'm like, all right, well, if you succeed by this much, then this happens. Or if you fail by this way more number, then this extra bad thing happens. So I do kind of like that rule set, and I think it can be applied to spells. However, the big question is, do we want to make spellcasting more powerful? Because that's really what this boils down to. And the designers do have a little sidebar here that says, yeah, this is going to probably make spellcasters a little bit more powerful because all of a sudden, all those close saves have an effect attached to them. One balancing thing that the designers don't talk about, which is kind of weird, is, are we supposed to use this for the DM side of things, right? In other words, are enemy spellcasters supposed to use it? Because everything about this book is player focused. It's all about the players casting the spells and enemy creatures making the saves. And it feels bad for the players if the enemy creatures make the save. I'm not sure that's the case in the other way around, right? Like, the DM obviously is casting spells because they want to get those spell effects off, but players feel great about getting the saves, right? They high five around. They're like, all right, we made it. Like, now they don't necessarily know the number they need to make. So you could still introduce this system, but maybe that's the way you balance it, is by what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's just that I didn't see a specific area where this rules specifically says, hey, DMs, you use these same rules as well, or use these rules but with these modifications or something. That was the only kind of oversight. It wasn't even big enough to make me put on a con list, because you could almost just presume that it's good enough. But it's interesting that that obviously is a bit of a power creep here, and there was no mention of like, should monsters be using this effect? Should just enemy spells casters use this effect with these spells? The one bit of balancing that is included, which is on this other page here, which I love, is that, hey, if you're worried about that power creep and giving spellcasters, which are already very powerful in 5e, more power technically, then you can limit these reliable spells through 2 different ways. I guess 3 different with the magic items, but you can do it through a feat by making them take a certain feat that then allows them to take certain reliable spells. Feats are very precious commodities, so that might be like over-tuning it too much. Or what I really like is limiting it to class features and only have it available through those class features. For example, only available through a cleric's domain list of spells, or a druid circle of the lands list of spells, or a warlock getting them through eldritch invocations, a wizard school, only their school spells are reliable, because I think that adds into the theme of that spellcaster, and then says, instead of giving you all of these reliable spells carte blanche, you only get certain ones that actually have this extra effect and makes them extra, special and more powerful for you, and would theoretically be themed towards whatever your build is. So I like that idea a lot for balancing purposes, more than just saying, okay, carte blanche, instantly all of your save or suck spells are just that much better. Instead saying, okay, well, these very few certain specific spells you've got in your build are now more powerful because they're part of your like themed build, because you took them as eldritch invocations or circle spells or domain spells or whatever. So I think that's pretty spiff. I like that a lot. And then the majority of this 30-page supplement, again, the rules are like 2 pages, and then it's like 20-some pages of spells, but they give you a list of spells from all of the official sources, Anathar's, obviously Player's Handbook, even the Wildmount one, which has new rules, or new spells in there. All of these spells, there's 60 of them that are considered save or suck spells that have been given this new reliable spell list. Again, save or suck are ones that you cast them, there's a single saving throw, and if a target makes the save, then absolutely nothing happens. Most of those spells do not deal damage. There's very few. I think Tasha's Caustic Brew is one of the few that I saw that, because it does damage at the start of the turn, but if they make the save, nothing happens. So that was an example. But most of the time, if you're dealing damage, it's like a half damage thing if you make the save. It's just weird that all the ones that aren't damaging don't have that kind of half effect. And I think it's pretty clever how it breaks down into a lot of effects. So I'll go over some examples, because that's the majority of what this supplement is. But a lot of them For example, if it's an ongoing debuff, it would have maybe they would only last a single turn. For example, that Tasha's Caustic Brew, which is, what is that? Right here. So on a close save, the creature takes 2d4 acid damage at the start of the next turn, and the effect ends for that creature. So, in other words, you've got a DC 14, a target rolls a 16. Normally, you'd be like, well, fuck, nothing happened. But in this case, if they only roll a 14 through 17, if I did that math right, not sure I did, maybe 18, whatever the less than 5 is, then they suffer the effect once, and that's it. That feels a lot better if you're casting that spell. You're like, oh, well, it's not as good as I was hoping, but it does something. Another example is Confusion. Lasts only a single turn, and they actually get like advantage on the Confusion table, which is a table of like what happens on their turn. So a target that made a close save, only affected to the end of its next turn. They roll a d10 twice and choose which of the corresponding behaviors it follows this turn, which to me is like you have advantage on that roll. But again, it only affects them the one turn. Banishment, same thing. Normally you keep somebody in a totally different plane of existence, and as long as you're concentrating, you keep them there. But if they just barely make the save, it's a close save, then they only are banished for a single turn. So you still get the thing off, it's just not lasting as long as you hoped it would. Suggestion is actually kind of similar. Normally you cast Suggestion as long as you're concentrating, they have to carry out the task, and then it ends, which is like 8 hours or something. In this case, they get to repeat the save basically at the end of each turn or something. So they have a very good chance of ending it much earlier. Those I feel like are pretty obvious, but still it's pretty nice to have that, effect. It just is a debuff that doesn't last as long. And that helps because there's not a lot of upkeep. There's not extra rules involved. It's just, hey, it's a one-time effect and then it's over. And I've used a lot of those kind of things where it's like, hey, you're affected by, short-term madness until the next turn or something. So I think one-turn things are not at all hard to keep track of. So I appreciate that. Other ones that I wrote down are effects with diminishing returns if they make the close save. For example, Bane normally does a minus 1d4. Instead, you subtract 1 from the results of your attack or saving throw. I don't think that's too much to keep track of. Cause Fear, which is one that one of my wizards is using a lot of currently, is normally frightens them. In this case, it doesn't frighten, but they still have one of the frightened effects where they cannot move closer to you, and that's another one where it's only until the end of the next turn. Command, by the way, is another one where it's until the end of your next turn. They can also freely act after they do the thing. Another good diminishing return one is, in fact, one that I cited earlier about, hey, if you're not paralyzed, then you're slowed. In this case, Hold Person or Hold Monster and all those. What is that, a second level spell, I think? Yeah. On a close save, the target's movement speed becomes 0. In other words, instead of paralyzed, you are effectively grappled. Pretty interesting, I think, because it's that you get that lesser effect. Hypnotic Pattern, very, very popular spell. Kind of a bane in a lot of DM's existence because it just locks down parties so nastily. In this case, normally it charms and incapacitates people who fail to save. This one allows you to say if they make the save, but it's a close save, the creature does become charmed, but is not incapacitated or has their speed reduced. I'd actually look up what the charmed condition is because I see it so little. The only way charmed usually comes into effect in a lot of my games is because of Hypnotic Pattern, and sometimes an enemy or creature is immune to the charmed effect, which makes them thankful or has advantage, and then that does apply to Hypnotic Pattern. But Charmed, it does have an effect. Charmed does mean you can attack your charmer or target them with harmful abilities or magical effects. So those specific ones who made that close save would not be able to attack the specific spellcaster. That's still in effect. Now, Hypnotic Pattern, a lot of these that have AoE effects, I'm less enthusiastic about giving them the close saves because you're typically not using Hypnotic Pattern on a single creature because as soon as you attack that creature, it breaks it anyway. So usually using it on an AoE effect, and you're always going to get some that save and some that fail. So I feel like that one harms the DM a lot more versus those big single target. And same thing with like Slow to an effect also. Slow, interestingly enough, also has a fun one though. Very clever. Where on a close save, the creature's initiative is reduced by 10 instead of giving them the horrifying effects of slow. There's actually no other spell that does that, and I don't think very many effects that actually move initiative or change that number very often. So I thought that was very interesting, and of course does have the writer on there that they don't get to go again if they've if the initiative breaks down that way. Other interesting close saves that are just completely new effects that are things that I would not have considered. Fairy Fire gives creatures a chance to move out of the area of effect. Normally it just affects them as long as the player is concentrating on it. But here you kind of track the area effect, and if they move away from it, or I think if they just move 15 feet, it said, they get to end the effect on themselves if they do the close save. We talked about slow. Polymorph probably has one of the most interesting ones and gets its own fancy artwork, which I believe is on the cover, which is on a close save, an unwilling creature is only partially transformed, and they get to retain one trait and one action of their source, which is why you've got this sheep, which is still flying and breathing fire, obviously a polymorphed dragon. That is a pretty interesting effect that certainly would be pretty meme worthy, I think, of any creature that is only partially transformed into like a squirrel. But yeah, the squirrel still has like this giant claw arm or something going on. And it does mention the fact that they get their original scores and proficiency bonus for original form. So basically they still have that one of their like stat block sheets you can leave the same for like defensive purposes and an attack roll or something. So that's an interesting one that's very much an example where if you're trying to get this polymorph off, they make the save, then nothing happens. Well, in this case, things definitely happen, but the creature still gets some kind of mitigation. So that might be one of the best uses I've seen of this whole rule system. Dominate beast or / dominate monster makes it so that they're still charmed and friendly to you, but they no longer directly obey your commands. So the DM could play around with that a little bit if they make the close save. And bestow curse, which is not a spell that basically anybody uses, but I appreciate that it's on here. If the target makes a close save, you can negate the save by amplifying the spell, which is not an extra rule. It just says you can allow yourself to be affected for the duration of the spells if the target had cast it on you. Which, that's actually just there'd be a whole subclass built around like affecting yourself with these negative spells as long as it affects other people. But I thought that was pretty interesting. So if you try to cast the spell, they make that close save, you say, all right, well, I'm going to take on the debuff myself in order to really get this on the boss monster and force them to make the save. Really interesting rules, I think, for the most part. Some of them are obvious, some of them are not so obvious and more, introduce these clever, interesting mechanics. None of them, I thought, added any kind of extra fiddliness, which was an important part of what I was looking at, because goodness knows the last thing we want to do is have combat take longer and worry about these extra saving mechanics and now having to look up all the close save rules. But I think the way they're integrated into the spells themselves, I love the fact that the designers meticulously went through 60 spells. I don't know if I mentioned the number, by the way, 60 spells from all those official sources, and changed all of them to include these reliable spell or variant spell, whatever they call them, rule sets, and gave me all the information on those spells. Didn't have to do all that either. So great artwork, great everything. I think most of it's stock art, but that's fine. It's a fucking rules book. Like, I'm not looking for amazing artwork or maps or anything here, but it still looks like a wonderful, professionally designed product. So I was very impressed, honestly, with this whole book and with this rule system. I don't think a lot of folks are looking necessarily to make spellcasting more powerful, but I definitely see the argument there. Save or Suck is absolutely a thing. And I think the interesting argument people have to, and I would love to hear from folks in the comment too, because I think this is, you could do a whole roundtable about this topic, is like, yeah, Save or Suck sucks, but do we also need to apply these rules to the DM side of things, doing the close save thing? And is it worth limiting these rules, which is what I really like, and I'm really glad the designers put this in here, because I don't know about just adding it completely where it's like all these spells, many of which are very powerful, like Hypnotic Pattern or Fear or Slow, do all of them suddenly get these reliable spell abilities, and just spellcasting is just that much better? Because let's face it, players are going to be casting spells way more often than the DM is going to be casting spells, so they're going to get the advantage even if we're both using these new rules. Instead, we can use these class features to where, okay, we're going to use these new rules, but only for very specific spells on everybody's spell list, and it's very, I don't even think like Paladin or Rangers have the option, but only like main spellcasters, and only then for those, like Wizard School that you're proficient in or something, have those extra features. But I think that's cool. Or you could tie it to like a magic item. Maybe it gives you, or, potions or something that give the ability to add that effect on there. So all of those are more interesting to me than just giving me the rules completely. But I still like this. I think it's actually a pretty cool system. But I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on the balance, the can of worms of making spell casting a little bit more powerful, even though Save or Suck does suck, I guess. Pro, easy to apply rules for every non-damaging save spell, just literally in one page, really, and then the second page lists, again, those class features. I guess I didn't go over Legendary Resistance, by the way, is something that kind of sucks for players to deal with. Also for bosses, it's very much like a band-aid for the whole Save or Suck system. And in this case, you can use Legendary Resistance to instead allow the whatever the boss creature is to get that close save effect. So if you wanted to, you could just use all of these rules for just legendary resistance purposes, which may be a way to help balance legendary resistance and not make it so much of a, DM just saying, oh, no, I don't think so. Like, it just makes the save. Instead, he says, okay, well, he's going to use his power to take a diminished version of this spell. If you just want to do that, you can. And I think that would actually be pretty effective. So that's actually another pro I've got on here, which is the option to limit reliable spells to special class features and or feats. But specifically, Legendary Resistance, also a great way to limit the powerful spells. And pro, 60 variant spells with new close save effects. Wow, there's a lot of spells that actually do Save or Suck. I did not know the number. I would not be able to come up with a number. And I think they're all really interesting. Some of them more obvious than others in terms of, giving them diminishing effects or just reducing number of turns. But a lot of them, like the slow, reducing initiative by 10, like that's really clever. The polymorph, like leaving one effect, still available. Those are some cool, interesting abilities that are worth exploring. Cons, I don't really have any cons. I did mention, obviously the balance worries, which is, something that's included in the sidebar, or just rules on how the DM could maybe use these things to help balance it. But those are more concerns I have over 5e in general, and like the balance of spellcasting versus these rules. And I think having all the extra limitations for the optional rules kind of help assuage any fears that I would have for using that. Final verdict, Save or Suck? It's got a question mark, so I got it. Helps mitigate saving throw woes with simple and effective rules applied to 60 official 5e spells. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on the YouTube channel, and support my work at patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brandon, Zendercider, Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Corey, Big Nut, John F., John L. Scott, Eric, Tyler, Nathan, Camp Crystal, Counselor, Andrew, Daryl, the Reldron, Captain Woody 79, Stephanie, Andy, Patrick, Jason, Ismail, Amit, Lumpy, Spuds, and Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Lizard Lounge, Sam, Jerome, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, Scott, Rufus, Carolyn, Jerry, Thomas, and Glenn. Thank you all very much for your support.